Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very pleased and honored to have with us today Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Jacobson, affectionately known as Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. Rabbi Jacobson is an internationally acclaimed speaker, educator, and writer. Rabbi Jacobson has served as editor-in-chief of the Algemeiner Journal, and Rabbi Jacobson was also the transcriber for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory. Rabbi Jacobson has authored numerous works, including A Tale of Two Souls on the Tanya, A Journey Through the Fundamentals of Chassidus, Emunah Series, Captain My Captain, and today we will be discussing with Rabbi Jacobson the history of Hasidism. Again, Rabbi Jacobson, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity and the privilege.
Thank you. Generally speaking, what were the primary reasons for the rise of Hasidism, and why, in fact, was it called Hasidism?
Great question. So the answer to the first question is the founder of the Hasidic movement is known as Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov actually means the master of a good name. His individual name was Yisrael, Israel. He was born in the Ukraine in the year 1698. I should say that some historians give the date of his birth a few years later, 1700. In the tradition of Chabad, where I grew up, which has a tradition all the way back to the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Schneerson of Liadi, whose teacher was a direct student of the Baal Shem Tov. The tradition is 1698 on the 18th of Elul, right before Rosh Hashanah, September. The Baal Shem Tov was born in Ukraine, and this is a time, let's understand, what does 1698 look like in Jewish life? So, it's not an easy time. It's especially a difficult time in Eastern Europe for a few reasons. First of all, Jews were just emerging from the horrific massacres of 1648-49, what's known as the Smolenetsky pogroms. Bogdan Smolenetsky, the leader of the Cossacks, there's still a statue of him in Kiev, unfortunately. He led the Cossacks in a titanic massacre of the Jewish communities in Poland and the Ukraine. The numbers of deaths range between 100,000 and 300,000. Till the Holocaust, this massacre was unparalleled, unprecedented, not only in terms of numbers, but also the sadism and the brutality. I'm not going to get graphic here, but we have diaries from the time, Rabbi Nathan Hanover and others, about how the Jewish men, women, and children were murdered throughout these communities. The shockwaves, the pain, the horror, the darkness in which it plunged the Jewish world into is very difficult to describe. So that's in terms of the morale and the physical destruction. Besides that, you have another event that shook up the Jewish world, and that's the false Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, who converts to Islam just a few decades before the Baal Shem Tov is born. You're talking about 1666. Shortly after the Chmielnicki pogroms, a huge part of the Jewish world believes that he's actually the Messiah, the Mashiach, and they prepare for it. And when he converts to Islam, the shockwaves it sends through the Jewish world are difficult to describe. This was a spiritual blow of unparalleled proportions. Finally, their hopes were high. After all this darkness, God is sending the Messiah. And he had a Gavaldic great spokesman, Nathan from Gaza, who did an amazing job. So I would say the morale of the Jewish people at the time was shattered to pieces. The physical poverty was incredibly excruciating. The spiritual spirit and morale was at an all-time low. The sense of cohesion and unity and pride and dignity in the Jewish community was very difficult. It was just non-existent. There was a hierarchy, and there were the simpletons. There were terrible divisions, and I would say you could say that the Jewish people have finally become so weary of a long and painful exile, where there was profound despair. Now there were the great scholars, you would say the elite of the Jewish people, but a little connection with the masses of the Jewish people, and a terrible divide. So on a social level, financial, moral, spiritual, psychological, the Jewish people were really facing the abyss. And it's that time, as the Hasidim would say, that God breathed in a spark of redemption into the Jewish people, a spark of redemptive consciousness by the name of Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. The Hasidim have a great metaphor. And they say sometimes when a person is in a faint, what do? You whisper their name into their ear to revive them. So how could God revive the Jewish people? He whispered into the Jewish people their name. What is our name? Yisrael. Hence the birth of Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. He wasn't just an individual. He became a person who gave the Jewish people back their name, their identity, their destiny. And essentially the Hasidic movement did something that is incredible from a historical point of view. In a few decades, it managed to change and affect the lives of millions and millions and millions of Jews. Such a revolution without one drop of blood, without an army, without a lot of money, without power, without influence. Talk about a grassroots movement from within. How the Baal Shem Tov did it is it's a miracle. When you're talking about it in the 1700s, just a few decades after the Baal Shem Tov's passing, the Hasidic movement has gripped the imagination of millions and millions of Jews in Ukraine, in Poland, and ultimately in much of Russia, and then it would travel to most of the countries in Eastern Europe. Not all, but most. And it really, I would say, it transformed the landscape of Jewish thought, of Jewish consciousness, and of Jewish spirit. The name Hasidim, interestingly, was not given by the Hasidim. Okay. It was given to them by their opponents. The Hasidim themselves, in the first generation, they called themselves Balei Tshuva. People don't know this. The students of the Baal Shem Tovs called themselves Balei Tshuva, which today is a term used for people who return to Judaism after growing up in a secular home. They're called Balei Tshuva. But the Baal Shem Tov students were all FFBs. They were from birth. They grew up in religious homes. They call themselves Balei Tshuva because one of the great messages of Chassidus is that we are all Balei Tshuva. That life is always about reinventing yourself every day, because truth is infinite, and infinite you never own. You always discover more and more and more and more. Another tremendous element of Chassidus is that failure is inherent to life. Don't look for perfection. Seek for accountability and connection. So they call themselves Balei Tshuva. Another name they had in the early generation was the Freiliche, the happy ones, the joyous ones. Because the Baal Shem Tov, he revolutionized Jewish life by focusing on the need and the ability to celebrate. You could say what the Baal Shem Tov did was, he saw that redemption did not happen, and disappointment was so deep. So I think he took the spark of the Messiah from the future, and he planted a little bit of it into every Jewish heart. So he brought a tremendous sense of joy to the Jewish people, and not through superficial promises, but by teaching them about who they are on the inside and what they're capable of, and really giving royalty to the Jewish individual, really teaching Jews how to become internal royals, even when their environments were quite dismal, and their wealth was non-existent, and their spirit was shattered. But he taught what a soul is, what God is, what Judaism is. The name Hasidim was given to them by what the group known as the Misnagdim, which means the opponents. Right. Interestingly, that they call the Hasidim, which literally means the pious ones, and that is because of the focus of the teachings of Chassidus on extra piety and enthusiasm and passion and prayer and Torah study and mitzvahs and observance of God and love of man and love of Jews, etc. So that became the name that stuck.